The Crusty Toe Cheese Band, Chapter 2. He was aware of his presence. He could feel the eyes quietly staring at him from way in the back of the room. He wasn't sure how or why he had this feeling. He was just aware of it. The stares were indeed coming from the back row of the 208 summer school room. They were coming from a boy of about 12, dressed in faded jeans and a jet black wrinkled leather jacket. Now this may not seem particularly strange, until you consider that it was in the high 80s that late morning in July, and it was so hot in room 208 that the paint was so desperate to get out of this sizzling sauna, it was peeling itself off the walls. The boy just sat there, staring blankly into space. The flow of facts and figures about ancient pharaohs of Egypt seemed to float by him as if they were part of a parallel world. The pharaohs could have been the man on the moon for all he cared. Nevertheless, there was a strange fascination with this boy. His clothes, his blank stare, his apparent existence in another world. Dusty's fascination was still echoing through his mind when he was once again dragged back to reality by the piercing, excited chimes of Mrs. Marchner's shrill voice. "Now, boys and girls, Principal Haviland has been kind enough to allow me to take you on a field trip to the Museum of Ancient Culture in Banslow. We will be taking a school bus ride to get there," she continued. "Now, once we get there, you will be immersed in the glory and beauty of a civilization that taught us all we know." All that we know? I wonder if the ancient pharaohs knew why a boy would be staring blankly into space wearing a wrinkled black leather jacket in the 80-degree weather. I pity Mr. Marchner, if this is his wife's idea of a fun day out. Well, I suppose it beats sitting in the summer school prison for 6 hours a day. After many more painful facts and figures about the pharaohs of ancient Egypt, the museum day finally arrived. As ordered, we all arrived at school promptly at 8 o'clock in the morning, with a bag lunch in hand. Little Joey Raffner arrived dressed in all that could be described as his bed linen. Turns out, he was pretending to be a pharaoh. Note to file, stay a long way away from Joey today. The bus was already belching out thick diesel fumes into the warm morning air. When Three-Chin Marchner was finished with roll call, all slowly boarded the bus, some in great anticipation of the journey into ancient Egypt, others thankful to be given a day of escape from the Nanster Middle School, if only for a few hours. The bus rolled out of the driveway of the school, down Main Street, alongside the park, and out onto the main highway to Banslow. Everything seemed normal and predictable about the ride, except for something that stuck out in Dusty's mind. At first he couldn't place what was different. What had he seen that didn't quite fit with the normal Nanster morning? As the bus trundled on, belching and wheezing its way down the highway, it came to him. Who was that figure he had seen? A body hidden by a tattered grey blanket on the park bench in Nanster. What was in that plastic bag beside the body? Had he seen this person before? Did he dream the whole thing up? There were many more questions than answers in this developing investigation. Either way he looked at it, Dusty decided that this was far more interesting than anything the ancient pharaohs had to offer. After what seemed like an eternity of guesswork and contemplation, the bus chugged into the driveway of the Museum of Ancient Cultures. Mrs. Marchner got up to announce that they would be spending the first 2 hours on the lower level before venturing upstairs. Only problem was that the bus hadn't quite stopped moving when she got up, and when it finally came to a halt, Three-Chin Marchner lost her balance and moved from left to right, swaying on each foot like a footbridge in a storm. Each movement of her body was followed obediently by the swaying of her chins from left to right at dizzying speed. There was no better sight to brighten Dusty's day. Mrs. Marchner had everyone assemble on the front steps of the museum to get into pairs for the museum tour. She counted off one by one. As the selection of kids got smaller and smaller, Dusty realized that he and Jacket Boy were among an ever-decreasing number of students to be paired up. Sure enough, no sooner had he thought this than the names were called. Dusty Scanton and Herman Apple. Herman Apple? Herman Apple? Why not John Wayne or Scarface? But Herman Apple? This just did not fit with the overall package. The first word out of his mouth was, "Hey." Well, what could I say? Hey. That was it, for what seemed like the longest minute. Eventually the awkward silence was broken. How'd you get into summer school? You stupid or something? Now call me stupid, but if I was stupid and in summer school, and so was he, what would that make him? I decided not to point this out at this particular moment. I failed English and social studies, and my mum made me come. Yeah, me too, mumbled whatever his name was. Dusty braved. What's your name? He knew, but he wanted to hear it from him to be sure he wasn't mixing him up with the Pharaoh of ancient Egypt. Herman Apple. Nope, Dusty hadn't confused him. This was him for real. Herman Apple, wrapped in jeans and a jet-black leather jacket that smelled more like a landfill than an apple. How you doing? Good. What's up? The conversation hadn't reached particularly high academic levels just yet, but they still had 5 hours in a museum to work on that. Ready, class? Let's go inside. The marching orders were given by General Marchner of the Double Chin Battalion. They were off. Look out, pharaohs.